Good evening. 4 days ago, George Soros shifted $125 million over to a super PAC in order to help Democrats win as many congressional races as possible, both in November as well as beyond. Meanwhile, the Biden administration recently announced a new initiative to give away 1 billion COVID at-home test kits to American households free of charge, which sounds great. However, many Americans throughout the entire country, they were rather surprised when they opened up their mailboxes, checked their government-issued COVID test, and learned that it was actually made in China. Let's go through it all together. This is your daily Facts Matter update, and I'm your host, Roman, from the Epoch Times. And now let's begin today's discussion by talking about the upcoming midterm elections. And to start with, as you're likely already aware, the prospects for Democrats is not looking too great. That's because you have Joe Biden's approval rating somewhere in the low 40s. You have Kamala Harris's approval rating even lower than that, somewhere in the 30s. Joe Biden, he was not really able to accomplish much of, if any, of his stated agenda during his first year in office. The rate of inflation is getting out of control, with the price of gas, food, housing, heating, and almost everything else being higher than it was under Trump. And then lastly, you have so far 29 Democrat House members who are not seeking re-election during this term. That's compared to only 13 Republicans who are doing the same thing. And there are many other factors as well, but those are the quick ones that are easy to highlight. And it's also worth mentioning that generally, the party of the incumbent president tends to lose seats in the midterm elections. That's just the reality. In fact, since the end of World War II, the party of the incumbent president has lost on average 26 seats in the House and an average of 4 seats in the Senate during the midterm elections. And so, when you combine this historical precedent with all of the headwinds that the Democrats have coming into the 2022 midterms, and frankly, it is not looking that great. And so, when things don't look that good, well, the answer is to throw more money at it. That's right. Seeing these dismal prospects, Mr. George Soros has pledged $125 million to help Democrats win in November. Specifically, 4 days ago, Mr. Soros shifted $125 million over to a super PAC in order to help Democrats win as many congressional races as possible, both in November as well as beyond. Now, let me give you a bit of background regarding this super PAC. And in case you're not aware, a super PAC stands for a Super Political Action Committee. Now, back in the year 2019, George Soros launched a super PAC called the Democracy PAC, which served as essentially his hub for his 2020 election spending. He eventually channeled about $80 million through the Democracy PAC to both Democratic groups as well as to mostly Democratic candidates during the 2020 election cycle, which now gives you a barometer for how important he sees the 2022 election actually being. Because while he funneled $80 million to defeat Trump in 2020, he is now funneling $125 million to keep Democrats in power through the midterms. That's an increase of about 50%. Now, in a statement that he gave to Politico, here's what George Soros said himself about this money that he is now shifting over to Democracy PAC. Quote, "The new 9-figure investment is aimed at supporting pro-democracy causes and candidates, regardless of political party, who are invested in strengthening the infrastructure of American democracy, which is voting rights and civic participation, civil rights and liberties, and the rule of law." And in that statement, the reference that he made to candidates who promote the rule of law likely refers to district attorneys. And so perhaps after the 2022 midterm elections, if everything goes according to Mr. Soros' plan, we can expect to see more George Soros-funded DAs in cities throughout the entire country. That way, more cities in America can experience the rule of law like they have over in San Francisco, Los Angeles, as well as Chicago. Regardless, though, in that statement to Politico, Mr. Soros added that this new donation to the super PAC is a, quote, long-term investment intended to support political work beyond this year. Now, in terms of the actual nuts and bolts of this particular donation, meaning how the money will actually be used, well, Mr. Alexander Soros, who is George Soros' son, he will serve as the president of Democracy PAC. Here's a recent statement from him, which gives you a clue as to how the money will actually be spent. The Capitol insurrection on January 6, 2021, and the ongoing efforts to discredit and undermine our electoral process reveal the magnitude of the threat to our democracy. This is a generational threat that cannot be addressed in just 1 or 2 election cycles. And indeed, they have already begun their work. That's because even though we're still about 10 months out from the midterm elections, Democracy PAC has already started to cut some checks. Thus far, here's where Democracy PAC's money has gone to. $2.5 million was given over to the Senate Majority PAC, and another $1 million was given to the House Majority PAC. Both of those, by the way, are major Democratic Party organizations which are aligned with the Democrats' congressional leadership. And then another $1 million went to the Democratic Association of Secretaries of State, which is a group dedicated to electing more Democrats as Secretaries of State. And the reason that this particular donation is so important, even though on the surface it might not seem that significant, but it is Secretaries of State who play a key role in administering the elections in a given state. And so even though these positions did not have much fanfare before, or even much of an implication in the national discussion, they now do. There is now a real battleground for Secretaries of State throughout the entire country. And so while on the one hand, you have this organization, the Democratic Associations of Secretaries of State, who have thus far raised about $4.5 million, including the $1 million donation from George Soros. On the other hand, you have President Trump, who is out there on the campaign trail endorsing candidates for Secretary of State, specifically in states that he officially lost in the 2020 election. And what this ultimately means is that there will be a lot to look forward to in this year's upcoming midterm elections. Now, getting back to George Soros' spending, though, his Democracy PAC has also given $250,000 to Black PAC, which is a group focused on turning out black voters, as well as $1 million to Vote Rev. Now, Vote Rev was formerly known as VoteTripling.org, and it's a group that's focused on training people to go to polling places, meaning to the actual locations where people vote, and then convince those voters to then reach out to their family and friends so that they can vote as well, which on the surface might seem like it could be a form of illegal electioneering, but I'm sure this group knows the laws and they have found a workaround to do it anyway. Regardless, though, we will have more details about what Democracy PAC is actually funding when they submit their next filing with the Federal Elections Commission. And when they'll do, I'll let you know right away. However, there is something else worth mentioning. As we've already discussed on a previous episode, several months ago, it was revealed that Mr. Soros, as well as another billionaire named Reid Hoffman, they are now funding anti-disinformation media companies in order to, what they call, restore social trust. To be more specific, Mr. George Soros and Mr. Hoffman, they're funding a new venture called Good Information Incorporated. And then Good Information Incorporated will use the money to fund new media companies in order to, and this is a quote from their press release, quote, restore social trust and strengthen democracy by investing in solutions that counter disinformation and increase the flow of good information online. Now, this company, the benign named Good Information Inc., was founded by Ms. Tara McGowan, who previously ran a progressive nonprofit called Acronym. And if that sounds familiar to you, well, that might be because, as reported in Fast Company, Acronym ran one of the biggest digital marketing campaigns, amounting to about $100 million, aimed at convincing millions of Americans to vote against Donald Trump in the 2020 election. And then furthermore, that same company, Acronym, it invested in another company called Shadow. And Shadow, you might have heard of that company as well. It was the firm that produced all those vote tabulation apps that were used in the Iowa caucuses last year, which, if you remember, the reporting for that was delayed by about 2 weeks because it had so many technical issues. Regardless, though, Ms. Tara McGowan, who is now in charge of her new venture, this Good Information Inc., which is funded partly by George Soros, and that will be investing media out into these media outlets to provide people with as much trusted and fact-based information as possible. Well, what that means in practice is that in the coming months leading up to the midterm elections, you and I will be seeing a lot more content, advertisements, billboards, fact checks, as well as almost everything else that are ultimately funded by Mr. George Soros. If you'd like to read more about either the Democracy PAC or about this Good Information Inc., I'll throw the links to all of my research into the description box below this video for you to check out. And all I ask in return is that you take a super quick moment to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. And now, let's move on over and talk about how the White House is sending out millions of made-in-China COVID test kits. Oh, sorry, what's this? Well, that's a great question, Roman, and it is today's sponsor, which is an awesome messaging and email service provider called Secure. And it's awesome if you're the type of person that actually cares about their privacy. Because, I mean, it's no big secret that these big tech companies are mining and remining our data all the time. In fact, in the year 2020, it was found that over 155 million Americans, likely including you and me, have suffered some form of data breach. And by the way, that's only what's publicly known. However, what's happened in the past, well, that can stay in the past because with Secure, your data and your messages can remain private. And that's because Secure has all of their data centers located over in Switzerland rather than in the US or in China. And the reason that's so important is that Switzerland has some of the strictest data privacy laws in the entire world, and they are not subject to the Intrusive Cloud Act. And if you want to know what the Cloud Act is, head on over to secure.com and watch their video on the homepage or on the video tutorials page, which is under their support section. Now, the thing that I personally love the most about the Secure app is the privacy aspect of it. They don't mine my data, they don't mine my phone number, they don't mine the phone numbers or data of my friends and family who I chat with. But best of all is that if your friends and family don't actually use the Secure app themselves, it doesn't matter. Because the way that it works is that when you use their Secure Send email technology, all of your emails and your messages route to Switzerland, and then the recipient can reply using their Secure Reply technology, and so everything remains private no matter what. And the same actually goes for their messaging app as well. And they're always coming up with new features. In fact, the most recent one they told me about, they sent me an email here, was that they're coming up with a new feature called Text to Chat by Invite. So they're an innovative company, and they really do care about your privacy. And so what they're doing doesn't work with your existing big tech email account. So check them out. You can head on over to secure.com. I'll throw the link into the description box below. And when you use promo code Roman, you can get 25% off. And the rates are not even that expensive to start with, by the way. It's only $5 for the Messenger and $10 for the email and Messenger combo. And they even offer a 7-day free trial. So head on over to their website. Again, it'll be linked in the description box below. Use promo code Roman to save some money. And now, Roman in the studio, back to you.
And now let's move on over and talk about made in China COVID tests. So about a month and a half ago, the Biden administration announced a new initiative to give away 1 billion COVID self-test kits to American households for free. And indeed, after a relatively long delay, they are now starting to finally reach people's mailboxes. However, many people throughout the entire country, they were a little surprised when they opened their test kits only to learn that they were made in China. That's right, millions of test kits that the White House is sending out to American households throughout the entire country, they have the 3 beautiful words, made in China, emblazoned right there on the box. Now, the reason for this is that a rather sizable portion of these test kits are being sourced from a company called iHealth Labs. And even though it has that little I in front of it, similar to iPhone or iPod, iHealth has nothing to do with Apple. Instead, iHealth Labs is a California subsidiary of a Chinese company called Andon Health. And what exactly is that company? Well, Andon Health was established 27 years ago, back in 1995, in the Chinese megacity of Tianjin, where they are known as a producer of blood pressure monitors. However, times have been rather rough for them. In fact, Andon Health lost money for 7 consecutive years, right up until the pandemic. That was when they shifted their production to making COVID-related equipment, things like body temperature scanners, as well as at-home test kits. And driven largely by their sales right here in America, specifically their sales to government entities, Andon Health's stock price, it has soared by about 1,400% since November. And so that brings us right back to the discussion of these government contracts. According to government contract records, you can see them up on your screen right now, since December of last year, Andon Health has won contracts worth over $2.1 billion with both the U.S. federal government as well as several different states. Now, the overwhelming majority of this contract amount comes from this White House initiative. In fact, according to publicly available federal contract grants, Andon Health received roughly $1.8 billion from the Department of Defense in order to roll out the Biden administration's plan. That amount was awarded through 2 contracts. You can see them up on screen right there. One was awarded on January the 13th, and the other one on January 26th. And when you add them up, they ensured that over 354 million Chinese-made COVID tests were sent out to American homes, which, for your reference, it accounts for over a third of the test kits which were actually being sent out by the White House. It's also worth mentioning that besides this deal with the federal government, Andon Health has also contracted with many individual states to sell COVID tests as well. These states include New York, Massachusetts, California, Washington State, Louisiana, Maryland, Ohio, as well as Washington, D.C. Meaning that whether you're getting a test kit from the federal government or you're getting it from your local state government, well, there's a good chance that it will ultimately be made in China. Now, while this is a rather stark example, to be frank, it is only the latest reminder of just how exactly dependent America has become on medical supplies that come from China. And some members of Congress are now calling for a reckoning. For instance, here's what Mr. Rob Whitman, he's a Republican congressman from West Virginia, and here's what he told us here at the Epoch Times. If we should have learned anything from this pandemic, it is that it's imperative to break U.S. dependence on Chinese medical and personal protective equipment supply chains. Now, what Mr. Whitman is referencing there is the fact that the vulnerabilities in the U.S. supply chain, they became rather apparent when the pandemic first began, and a lot of workers on the front lines here in America were struggling to get all manner of medical supplies, and eventually they had to turn to China in order to get adequate equipment. And so Mr. Whitman, he says that at the very least, the current administration should be leading by example and advocate for medical equipment to be made domestically. Here's what he added on that front. We should be supporting hardworking Americans and businesses, not relying on unfriendly regimes. Likewise, Congressman Brad Wenstrup, he's a Republican from Ohio, and he echoed the same view. Here's what he told us here at the Epoch Times. The fact that the United States is mass distributing Chinese-manufactured COVID-19 tests further highlights the need to bring back U.S. manufacturing for critical industries. It is a national security issue as well as a national health security issue. And by the way, just as a small aside, about 2 weeks ago, there was another similar episode where Congress distributed made-in-China masks to all the different members of the House. What happened was that the House congressional physician, he required that all legislators must upgrade their masks from a cloth mask to either an N95 or a KN95. And so then, later in the week, the Office of the Attending Physician distributed KN95 masks to all the lawmakers who were in Congress. However, it turned out that those masks, just like the at-home test kits, were made in China. And this fact, it caused more than 120 Republican lawmakers to voice their concerns by sending a letter over to Ms. Nancy Pelosi. Here's what part of that letter said. China is perhaps the United States' greatest geopolitical adversary, and its government is culpable in the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Not a day goes by without new information showing the scale of the Chinese Communist Party's efforts to hide and cover up the outbreak. With the regime's pandemic cover-up, suppression of whistleblowers, and continued efforts to obfuscate virus origin tracing efforts, it is inexcusable for taxpayer dollars to be spent in support of the Chinese economy. And then to sum it all up, perhaps Mr. Greg Murphy, who is a congressman from North Carolina, perhaps he is the one who summed it up most succinctly. Here's what he said. We are fighting a virus that came from China. Yet the Speaker, Pelosi, is comfortable with publicly supporting a Chinese manufacturer sending our taxpayer dollars overseas and further advertising our dependency on China on the faces of Congress. Regardless, though, getting back to the topic of these at-home COVID tests, on Friday, the White House announced that they have already sent out 60 million of these tests to American households. Now, we here at the Epoch Times, we reached out to both the White House as well as to iHealth Labs to comment on this whole matter, but either have yet to get back to us. Regardless, though, if you would like to participate in this White House program and order yourself a made-in-China at-home COVID test kit, well, you can do so over at covidtests.gov. I'll throw a link to it. It'll be right there in the description box below. Don't forget to order your mask today. And by the way, I'll also throw the link to all the articles that we discussed as well. It'll be down in the description box below. And all I ask in return is that you take a moment to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't already in order to get this type of honest news content delivered directly into your YouTube feed while YouTube still allows it. Also, consider hitting that notification bell if you haven't already. And also, if you have a Telegram account, consider following us at FactsMatter_Roman. We'll publish the links to all of our episodes there. So if anything ever does happen here on YouTube, you can find the links to our episodes on Telegram. And then, until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed and stay free.